IBC has been like the best interop solution in terms of battle-tested nature, but it's really struggled to like expand outside of Cosmos.
It motivates me a lot to prevent that version of the world where these big assets people want are locked behind a pay-gated centralized entity. And one of the things I'm most excited about taking IBC in this direction is how can we make really cheap and very easily programmable multi-chain applications on top of a very programmable interop layer.
I mean, interop is still terrible.
All right, guys, welcome to the best flavor of interoperability panel. I am Andy. I am the co-founder of the Rollup. We do a lot of media, investing, podcasts, streams like that, some technical content, some entertaining content, some investing content. We have 4 great panelists today. Let's do a brief round of introductions, starting with Meg.
Hey, I already gave my introduction, but I'm Mag, one of the co-CEOs of Interchain Labs, now Cosmos Labs.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm the only one without a microphone, so we'll be sharing. And I co-founder of a project called TimeWave. We build a protocol, Valence, which is an interoperability protocol at the application layer. And I used to work with this guy.
Hi guys, Trey. I work at Polygon and I focus on infra and protocol BD. My main areas of focuses are AgLayer, our Interop solution, CDK, the stack that you can use to build your own layer 2, and payments and AI on Polygon network itself. Pleasure to be here.
Hola, amigos. I'm Zon, one of the co-founders of Initia. I'm Chief BDSM Officer, Business Development, Strategy, and Marketing.
Beautiful. All right, guys, just gonna lay the landscape. I'd like to understand from your perspectives how you guys are thinking about the actual product of interoperability. I think a lot of people think of it as a way to transact crypto assets and messages across chains, but less so as a product. So when you're thinking about interoperability as a product, as if you kind of put it into a box, what does that look like to you guys?
Give a quick answer. I tend to take a pretty simple perspective on interop. So to me, it's all about assets and asset access. So I think why people want interop is they either want to export or import an asset from like a particular place. So I think one of the great reasons why I think like people have built up interop between L2s is they wanted to export and import sort of the assets between the places. I think you're seeing a lot of that now with RWAs. So you're seeing increasingly asset issuers tie themselves to interop protocols. So like a great example of that is USDT0 with layer 0. I think you've seen other examples of that, if I'm not mistaken. I think Ondo has like a lot of those. And I think one thing that is happening though is for the first time, and I think IBC really spearheaded this, you're seeing programmable interop. So programmable interop meaning not only can you export and import assets, but you can also export and import functionality. Meaning if someone has a state machine somewhere else that you want to influence from your state machine, you can do that. And I think that's really exciting. I think like that's actually very early stage right now. I think it's quite slow, and it's definitely not to the point where an API is, right? Like in traditional Web 2, where you can do that really seamlessly. And one of the things I'm most excited about taking IBC in this direction is how can we make really cheap and very easily programmable multi-chain applications on top of a very programmable interop layer.
Outside of assets, does that include data?
I think so, but I think the interop protocols for data, I think the crypto protocols oftentimes are overkill for data, right? So like I think RPC is really the interop protocol for data on blockchain. Like that's what people use to query data. But I think the only exception to that is like pricing data, what it has like on-chain. Wouldn't you say?
Fair.
I mean, assets are a form of data, so assets are kind of an oracle for their own own price.
Wow.
The Skip Go also includes things like message routing within packets. So that's another form of data that seems to be pretty valuable. And then I see the Overton window opening beyond that for valuable data across chains, including maybe the last thing would be like program state as data.
From my view, as somebody who's been in DeFi for like 5 years doing on-chain stuff, probably done like 10,000 transactions or so, most of those 2020, 2021.
Get back on chain.
I know, it's actually sad how my transaction count was like, and now it's kind of going down. But that being said, from my view, IBC has been like the best interop solution in terms of battle-tested nature. But it's really struggled to like expand outside of Cosmos. Like what has IBC done wrong? Like is it too much of like that Ethereum foundation kind of like not capitalistic, not doing BD, not going out there and trying to close deals and make stuff happen in the lens of decentralization? Why has IBC not kind of persisted outside of Cosmos?
I mean, I will say there's 0 BD people on the IBC team.
Is that a problem though?
Probably. We are now expanding it to have BD people on that side. I think the issue is, and it goes back to a point that I had formerly, which is there's two kinds of business, right? There's open source business where sure you can hire a big BD team to try to push the open source adoption, but the reality is open source because you want natural adoption and you want people to build on top of it, right? And I think historically, because when you use IBC, it doesn't drive the value of anyone's business, really, right? Directly, in the same way that Layer 0 does, right? Or that Axelar does, or et cetera. And so it's been hard to find a team incentivized to do that because there's no value capture. And I think one of the things that we're trying to change is we are combining our Skip Go product with IBC to build something that actually does drive value. In this case, drives value to the Cosmos Hub, very small amount of value, but in aggregate maybe. And use that to sort of incentivize ourselves and incentivize people, on our team to really push that as sort of a credible competitor to these like very well-funded, very centralized bridging alternatives.
Yeah, IBC was a hot pile of garbage until we had Skip API essentially come in and just start doing the routing for you. Before that, it was like IBC is very secure, which is lovely, but it's point-to-point transfers, and that was a massive pain to deal with, especially when the hub wasn't used as like a router. But with the introduction of IBC Eureka, the hub is now being used as a router, and SkipGo is by far the best aggregator for dealing with these paths. And so I think IBC has, there's water spilling. IBC has a good path to becoming more prevalent. I think one of the hard things it's going to have to deal with is asset issuance. So things like Layer 0, they have insane vendor lock-in, but it's amazing, right? Like once you have USDT0 locked into Layer 0 or SUSDE from Athena or WETH from EtherFi, these are the assets people want to move, and you can only move them through Layer 0. And so I think that's going to be the tough battle that has to be fought with.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. If you look at how Layer 0 does his business, they lock in as many asset issuers as possible, and they basically made bridging a commodity that has some standards. It has to be free. So if you want to go out and sell your own Interop solution, you're basically giving it out for free. Otherwise, you're not going to be competitive with Layer 0. And the other aspect to consider, with EigenLayer coming out and the massive amount of liquidity they brought to the market, Layer 0 got all the asset issuers as well onboarded with exclusivity. So if you want to win this war, first of all, you're fighting by yourself. Layer 0 just standing still and conducting their business as per usual. You need to make sure that your Interop solution is compatible with any OFT, or OFTs that Layer 0 does. So being compatible and not creating like an additional layer of fragmentation. So build towards that way, meaning towards unification. Yeah.
I think to push back on that a little bit, though, I've chatted to a couple of the vendors that Layer 0 has attempted to lock in, and usually they either regret or don't want to be locked in, right? Like they're like, well, what if it doesn't, what if it gets hacked, or what if I have to exit or try to get distribution to somewhere else? And I think as much as possible, it motivates me a lot to prevent that version of the world where these big assets people want are locked behind a pay-gated centralized entity versus a world where they're much more free and open. And I feel like we have the customer on our side, and in terms of like that's eventually what they're going to want as well.
Does this feel like the Empire versus the Republic?
Yeah, we're the Republic here. Yeah. If you've ever seen Andor, the TV show, we're that guy. Yeah. So how do we like prevent this? Because I actually think it's a very negative version of the world.
I don't know. I personally love Layer 0, and I use them. But I also use IBC. So is there like a Geneva in Star Wars?
I think one possible solution is assuming that most of the asset issuers will have their contract exclusivity expired, is to make sure that the liquidity migration can happen seamlessly. Meaning that, look at LBTC, right? They have billions of dollars in BTC locked with Layer 0. And in the most ideal case, those users, being liquidity providers, vault providers, or retailers themselves, should be able to migrate to a different solution without even taking a glimpse of what's happening behind the scenes. Like
LBTC does also use IBC, for what it's worth. That's how they get to Babylon.
And Lombard is building a Cosmos chain.
yes.
Is there a best way to generate revenue and monetize interoperability as a protocol, as a product?
I would love to speak about that. With AgLayer, what we try to offer, actually no matter what bridging solution you are offering or using, we have recently announced Vault Bridge, which basically allows all the assets that are bridged from the Layer 1 being Ethereum to your own layer, being a Layer 1 or Layer 2. Those assets are locked on Ethereum, and instead of having idle assets, you can opt in and deposit them into Morpho. So for example, if you're Cosmos Hub, right, and you're integrated with Layer 0 Wormhole, and they have on the Layer 1 in the lock and mint burn contracts, $1 billion of ETH, you could have those assets earning 2 to 3% per year, and having your users still being able to access those assets on Cosmos Hub. And ultimately, it's the chain that decides how to use those funds. Cosmos Hub could decide, for example, to keep that for ICL or distribute it to stakers, users, additional yield. But definitely, the futures that can come with interoperability are there from like a DeFi perspective, I would say.
So you're basically saying like you become like an asset issuer almost.
I would say you have
monetizing leverage.
Yeah.
There's really only two main businesses in crypto: order flow and leverage. And interoperability has kind of access to both. SkipGo is primarily an order flow business, and this is a leverage business. And there's kind of like spectrum in between, but yeah, there's a big opportunity for folks to monetize idle assets. The talk just before was about monetizing idle assets in mini apps in Telegram.
This is a good idea. I'm going to steal it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be the norm. This is banking, eventually.
So the era of trying to charge fees on transactions and transfer volume is just unsustainable, not going to work?
No. I mean, that's the primary order flow business. You either monetize fees directly, or you have access to information about trades that are about to be made. So more of the Citadel style.
when I use bridges, it's often through, like you say, like some sort of swap interface, like a jumper or a D-bridge, et cetera, or skip go, right? Do you guys think that users are actively using these to make their life easier on chain? Do you think it's because you can see all of the different chains, different assets on those chains in one UX? And then I'm curious, like, do you guys see that like these main platforms sticking around for a while, or do you think that the kind of Overton window for how people are accessing multi-chain world is going to change?
I think we're very close to those type of applications kind of receding into the background. They'll still exist, but they'll be similar to like an ISP or an exchange point or something where, I want to go use this whatever Telegram mini app, or I want to go use this other thing that's on another chain, and there's a provider that gives access to the kind of mobility to get there, but the user doesn't really have a direct awareness of what's going on.
Yeah, I think everything moves into wallets direct to the consumer when they're just trying to move. That's the platform they use for their assets already, and APIs in the back end will just do the routing.
Yeah, I do think there's a strong argument that actually a lot of this gets aggregated by some kind of like ChatGPT-like interface. Like there's a new Cosmos chain called Warden that's building and I think the guys might be here. I'm not sure. Oh, there they are. They're building basically a wallet experience where you just ask it to conduct a multi-chain operation, and then it breaks it down into a bunch of APIs. And I actually think that's like potentially going to be the way that people do interop in the future, right? Just sort of I guess like intense or kind of like relevant here, but just asking what you want it to do, and then some kind of intelligent transaction constructor, which in the case of Skip Go, it can do that. And I think we're seeing that more and more in other places. But just one other point on the order flow leverage. I think one thing we have realized in crypto, and this I think is generally true, is order flow is generally a better business on lower amounts of capital. Like if you look at Hyperliquid, they talk about billions of dollars of volume a day, but in reality it's a very small amount, just highly leveraged. But they still take fees on the total amount, and it adds up to so much, right? It's like $1 billion of fees a year, I think. I think in the case of leverage, or when you're trying to monetize capital with yield and taking a cut, the numbers you have to have are so high, right? Like BlackRock level to like have extremely large businesses. And I think we haven't seen, unless institutions come in real size, that kind of business really able to take off yet, just because you need so much capital.
On that note, I think we've spent quite a bit of time talking about kind of like chain-to-chain interop and thinking about it from that framing, but let's just flip the framing towards more of kind of the traditional financial rails, RWA, stablecoins, TradFi, and kind of the interop with our world in DeFi. How are you guys thinking about the differences in interop standards, procedures, and in your experience speaking with more institutional capital, what is it that they're looking for to come on chain? How do they want to do that? And kind of what are their do's and don'ts that you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of institutions that are building Cosmos chains. They're like less talked about, but like Provenance does a bunch of real world asset issuance and works with a bunch of banks, does like billions of dollars of volume. In my experience, basically, I mean, these are super long sales cycles, so you're kind of dealing with these entities for years and kind of understanding what their needs are. There's different compliance standards that you need to deal with. Ultimately, these folks care about the bottom line. Like they are, there's a reason that they're this large, and they want to cut out a middleman, or they want to see some kind of marginal yield that they can't get elsewhere. So the ability to cut out a credit card vendor or someone who's taking a cut is very attractive to them. their business is hyper competitive, so they're looking for solutions that give them, room to maneuver that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and I also think when it comes down to serious institutions and not just someone who will take $100 million just to build with your stack, what they care about is how operations are conducted from like a centralization, decentralization perspective. Like a recent example that I can think of when comparing and benchmarking layer 0 and AG layer to an institution is when it comes down to layer 0, there's like this additional set of validators and you basically have to verify before you trust, whereas with AG layer you have the ticket proofs and full execution proofs. That is math and it's undeniable. And this is something that they would rather choose over a small set of validators that they are not sure if you can trust or not.
Just curious has anyone heard of Corda? C-O-R-D-A? Yes? No?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I think a lot of people in crypto probably don't know about Corda. Just because it's very institutional focused, but it's a stack they build a stack in like a whole set of infrastructure around institutions. And I think the three things they say institutions need, and I think I probably believe them on this, like one is privacy or confidentiality. People can't, like if you're doing someone's banking transactions, like no one's allowed to look at those. And so like Ethereum doesn't work, for example, for that. They need, customizability. So the ability to affect and control the state machine and make sure that they have trusted actors running it versus unknown actors. And the third thing is interoperability, right? And so they need to be able to transact with other financial institutions. They need to be able to, ingest and send out capital and do that at scale. And I think for all the talk about institutions in crypto, I think a lot of times people in crypto are meeting institutions on their own terms, meaning on crypto's terms, saying, no, be open, be permissible, like put all your assets in my DeFi protocol to pump my token. Like that, they're not interested, I think, for the most part. And I think one of the things that we're exploring right now, just on the Cosmos side, and especially with Cosmos EVM, is how can we build a stack that fits those three pillars, right? And what kind of traction can we get, and approaching institutions on their terms, right? And saying, well, here are the three things that you need, or 5 things that you need, or whatever. And then from there, getting excited about crypto and then opening up, right? I think that's a much more focused path than I think like trying to track them into the crazy world that we have.
Do you guys think that stablecoins will be mostly on like 1 or 2 chains going forward, and that a lot of the world's commerce in stablecoin transfers will just be on a couple chains, or do you guys think that they'll be on a ton of chains?
No. I mean, there's like I think 2 Tether chains coming out right now. They're stable, and there's one other one.
Plasma.
Plasma, exactly. There's a Circle chain coming out. There's all the different centralized exchanges have their own chains. There's Ethereum, but that's now bifurcated into many different L2s, all with their own DeFi ecosystems. I think the solution is no longer how do we compress it all into one chain. The solution is how do we make the multi-chain vision work, right? Because like the drive to build your own thing is so strong. Everyone wants to do it seemingly, and as you get more successful, you want to do it even more. And so the question is, well, how do we make that work at scale, right? And how do we make that a good UX for users versus how do we take things away and compress them into one place, in my opinion.
Zon, maybe you can talk to us about how you've crafted a seamless experience with Initia, and just kind of some of your thoughts from the last like 6 to 8 weeks of users interacting with multiple chains within Initia, and then how they actually have been using like the kind of chain abstracted feel. What's been the feedback? What's been your experience? And like, what have you learned from trying to create something that for human users that they really enjoy?
I think there is a long way to go for cross-chain DeFi and user experiences. I think having some of the interoperability protocols just baked into the system and then relying on having only one standard is hugely beneficial for starting to build the UXs that you need on top of this. And SkipGo is the GOAT for allowing us to plug in and do all of this. But I think right now the experience is still very fragmented. Even if you have Interop and you can send assets and interact across the chains, you still need developers to implement a lot to make it feel seamless, and I think that's going to take years. One of the big advantages that I think we've built is this thing called the Initia wallet, and it's not actually a wallet. What it does is it allows you to connect any EVM wallet or social logins and sign transactions on any chain despite what VM they are in. And that is going to become essentially this portal or front end that lets you see your assets on every chain, lets you bridge them around, lets you interact, and slowly over time, that's going to be a huge UX piece that abstracts the idea of being multiple different blockchains. And I think we just need a lot more development into systems like that, and you can't really start to build that feel unless you have the back-end systems all somewhat on the same stack. And that's why Initia has taken a very enshrined approach. We only use one Interop standard, only use one DA standard, only use one Oracle standard, and now we can start to build these pieces, but it's definitely been something that we need to keep working on.
And so is your idea that the wallet will be where people mostly do their cross-chain swaps and then mostly come into the ecosystem via downloading the wallet at some point?
So you don't need to download the wallet. You just go to a regular app, you click connect, this widget essentially pops up, and you can connect your EVM wallets like Rabby or MetaMask or anything like that. And then essentially flows will start to become, when you hit deposit, you don't have to have assets on that chain, but you can see where all of your assets are because the widget knows where all of your assets are. And you can just deposit directly in from essentially anywhere.
Question for you guys about intense-based interop solutions. These have been really getting traction with regards to their speed and low cost due to kind of off-chain solver networks being able to fill orders easily and quickly. Again, do you guys think that intense-based designs are going to be growing over the next 1 to 2 years in terms of people's preferences as well as adoption, or do you think that they've kind of reached a steady state?
Yeah, so while I was at Skip, we built an intense protocol. We also built a non-intense protocol, so kind of have both perspectives. Yeah, SkipGo is primarily uses routing that does not. Fast transfer is intense. Everything else is not intense. And yeah, I think there's a place for both. On a relative basis, I think intense are certainly going to increase in market share, but there's things that they cannot do. The primary trade-off is liquidity. You need to have assets available in order to do immediate delivery, and that is capital intensive. So intents are very good at the kind of the fat tail or the assets that are have a lot of volume. If you want to do long tail, then you're going to need something that's able to give you last mile delivery.
Yeah, I think it's essentially like you can imagine how we do transportation and fulfillment right now, where you have these big filling hubs and centers and warehouses, which intents are processed between to make the big leg really quick, and then you have last mile delivery through message-based solutions. So for example, SkipGo Fast right now does intent processing from anywhere on Ethereum, essentially directly to Osmosis, and then uses IBC for the last mile. And I think that's how a lot of intent protocols are going to work in the future. And we'll just have a few more of these hubs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I see them as a short-term solution for distribution channels, meaning that you get your assets and your protocol connected to more chains. But in the long run, when deploying these interop solutions becomes easier, more cheaper, I agree with Zon here that the messages is what reserves and stays from like the intent side. And if I were to describe, for example, how we would integrate Agley within the hub and the Cosmos ecosystem, given how large the ecosystem is, like hundreds of chains, it would be a waste of time, money, resources to go after each single deployment, but rather attaching the Agley with the Cosmos hub on the EVM sovereign side, and then leveraging IBC and Aglayer with bridge and call, the middleware and the callback from the IBC that already offers. I think that's like the perfect example of how multiple interop solutions can work together by leveraging each other and accessing to larger ecosystems. But again, it's a short-term solution, like intent and solvers. But intents will stay there, hopefully, because they make the user experience better.
I don't mean to be like too close-minded here, but isn't it too late for new interop competition to come into market now with Aglayer? Just ship the first iteration. I know fast mode is coming next several quarters, and then kind of iterating on a front end as well. But on the front end, you're going to compete with all the providers that we were talking about earlier. On the interop side, you're competing with kind of a cutthroat Interop BD kind of war, and then on the tech side, you're also reliant on ZK and the progress there.
Just keep going, man.
Just
Crush me, destroy me completely.
So just curious, what you would.
No, I think those are definitely valid concerns, meaning that there is a lot of exploration from like the tech side, the BD side. There are so many challenges, but it depends on how you decide to approach the market. Meaning, from the get-go, we want Aglayer to be compatible with IBC, try to be supportive towards layer 0, Wormhole. As I said, Vault Bridge is the solution that we opted for Aglayer so that you make use of idle assets, but we are making sure to make that work with Wormhole, Axeler, and all the bridges. They get like a lower yield, but that's still available to them, and that's how we want to approach the market, being independent and agnostic, and trying to make this integration work seamlessly, meaning that Aglayer will relatively soon support OFTs from layer 0, and we will do our best to work with other protocols and bridges. So even though the challenges are there, the end goal is not to make Aglayer a great business, but rather make it sustainable and benefit the end user, depending if it's like a retailer, an LP, a vault provider, it doesn't matter. Make it good for them, and trying to gatekeep assets or other integrations will just be an additional tax of fragmentation to the end user.
I mean, Interop is still terrible. So like, there's obviously still room for people in the market. Anyone who's like dealt with the infrastructure layer is, just gone through years of abuse, essentially.
All right, guys. Last one. What is the Interop protocol or product that you use the most on chain?
Stargate Finance.
I mean, up until 7 months ago, I was working in Cosmos, so I will have to say probably IBC, which is contradictory. But when I moved to Ethereum, I would say definitely layer 0. It just works, and that's what I want. I want yield in a fast way and accessible way, and the bridging wars from 2023 was won by certain players, and the outcome is there. Like, there's distribution, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, there's like layers of the interop stack that we don't even like acknowledge because they just work. So like signing like just works, and we don't talk about interop there because like people just have adopted the same signing standard for the most part. Key derivation is like a bit of a, I don't know, challenge, but I mean, up until recently, Skip Go was a prime contender for sure.
Why'd you say up until recently?
Yeah, what is it now?
Because now we're enemies. Just because I have been, my focus has been like trying to get more involved in the EVM ecosystem, more involved in Solana ecosystem. Like, that's my job now, is to like try to tie together disparate ecosystems and experimenting a lot elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess for me, it truly is skip go. I use it quite a bit. I mean, since we added IBC Eureka and we can do seamless transfers and swaps between Ethereum, that's like now one of my favorite features. But I would say, actually, if I'm being completely honest, underneath that, there is a different interop protocol we haven't mentioned today that does incredible volume that probably, if you looked into my usage, is getting the most actively used, which is CCTP, right? Which does so much volume, and Skip Go does a ton of volume for CCTP.
Awesome, guys. Thank you for the panel. Let's give it up for the awesome panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for Andy.